The subtle scent of sandalwood and old paper was a constant, comforting presence in my office. It was a smell I'd carefully cultivated, meant to evoke tranquility and professionalism, a stark contrast to the emotional storms my patients often brought through the door. My world, much like this room, was meticulously ordered. Every book on the shelf aligned, every cushion perfectly plumped on the deep green armchair facing my own. I was Martha, a psychologist, and my life was a testament to structure, logic, and the profound importance of maintaining professional detachment. My marriage to David, a successful architect, reflected this order. Our days were predictable, our evenings a quiet rhythm of shared meals and separate pursuits. It wasn't a fiery passion, but a comfortable, stable partnership built on mutual respect and shared ambitions. Or so I believed. I prided myself on my ability to remain an impartial observer, to guide without becoming entangled, to offer a steady hand without emotional investment. It was the bedrock of my practice, a principle I lived by. Today, however, the usual hum of my disciplined mind felt a fraction off-kilter. My afternoon appointment was with a new patient, Valerie, referred by a colleague who described her as complex and exceptionally perceptive. The waiting room usually offered a momentary lull before the emotional deluge, but today, a quiet anticipation pricked at me. I smoothed my skirt, a nervous gesture I immediately regretted, betraying a flicker of unease. The chime of the doorbell announced her arrival. My assistant, Sarah, a woman whose calm demeanor rivaled my own, ushered her in. "Martha, Valerie is here for her 2 o'clock appointment." I rose, offering a polite, professional smile. And then I saw her. Valerie was a striking woman, barely 24, yet she carried herself with a poise that belied her youth. She wasn't overtly glamorous, but her beauty was undeniable, a quiet, almost understated elegance. Her hair, the color of rich mahogany, framed a face sculpted with delicate precision. Her eyes, a deep, captivating shade of hazel, were what truly held my attention. They were large and intelligent, and when they met mine, they seemed to absorb every detail, every nuance of my expression, with an unnerving intensity. It wasn't an aggressive stare, but a profound, almost knowing gaze that made me feel inexplicably seen. "Valerie, please come in," I said, my voice steady, though I felt a subtle shift in the air, a peculiar electric charge I hadn't anticipated. She moved with an effortless grace, settling into the armchair directly opposite me. She didn't fidget, didn't scan the room with casual curiosity. Her focus remained entirely on me, a quiet, unwavering attention that was both flattering and subtly disorienting. She wore a simple, tailored navy dress that highlighted her slender frame, and a delicate silver chain around her neck, reflecting the muted light. Her hands, long and graceful, rested calmly in her lap. There was a quiet confidence about her, a certain composure that made her seem older than her years, yet also incredibly open, like an unread book promising a compelling story. "Thank you, Dr. Reed," she replied, her voice soft, with a melodic cadence that was surprisingly soothing. "It's a beautiful office." "Thank you," I responded, already pulling my focus back to the present, to the task at hand. This was a professional setting, and I was a professional. My initial assessment began immediately, poised, observant, perhaps a touch reserved, but with an underlying current of something more. We began with the usual introductions, the standard questions about her reasons for seeking therapy. Valerie spoke in articulate, carefully chosen words, describing a general sense of unease, a feeling of being disconnected despite her seemingly full life. Her answers were insightful, almost philosophical, revealing a sharp intellect. She detailed her work in a nonprofit organization focused on environmental conservation, speaking with a quiet passion about her commitment to making a difference. As she spoke, those hazel eyes never left mine. They weren't judging or demanding, but rather seemed to be taking me in, studying me, almost as if she were the observer and I, the subject. I found myself consciously maintaining eye contact, resisting the urge to look away, to break the peculiar spell her gaze cast. It felt different from the usual patient's attempt to connect. It felt like a silent dialogue, a challenge to my carefully constructed professional facade. I noted her slight smile when I offered a particular interpretation, a subtle curve of her lips that hinted at a shared understanding, almost an amusement. It was as if she were inviting me into a conversation far deeper than the words we were exchanging. I recorded her responses, scribbling notes on my pad, my thoughts meticulously catalogued. Intelligent, observant, possesses a subtle magnetism. I told myself it was simply the dynamic of a perceptive patient. Yet a small, unacknowledged part of me felt exposed, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. The air in my office, usually so still and predictable, now felt charged with an unexpected, almost unsettling energy. My carefully cultivated tranquility had been gently, almost imperceptibly, disturbed. The subsequent sessions with Valerie followed a similar, quietly compelling rhythm. My office, once a bastion of predictable calm, now felt subtly altered by her presence. The scent of sandalwood still lingered, but it was now underscored by something sharper, more vibrant, whenever she occupied the green armchair. I told myself it was simply the challenge of a particularly insightful patient, one who pushed the boundaries of typical therapeutic interaction. Valerie delved deeper into her background, recounting a childhood marked by intellectual curiosity and a somewhat solitary nature. She spoke of a close bond with her grandmother, a woman she described as a silent observer with an extraordinary capacity for empathy. "She taught me to see beyond the obvious," Valerie once remarked, her gaze holding mine, "to understand the quiet languages people speak without words." Her observations about the world, and indeed about herself, were articulate and often profound. She analyzed her own feelings with a precision that I, as her therapist, found both impressive and, at times, unnerving. She wasn't evasive, she was simply intricate. Her questions, always framed with careful politeness, often seemed to gently probe my own perspectives, subtly shifting the dynamic. "Do you ever find," she asked once, tilting her head slightly, "that the act of observing changes the observer?" It wasn't a direct question about me, but it felt like one, an invitation to a deeper, more personal dialogue that I instinctively knew I couldn't accept. I would respond with a professional, generalized answer, drawing from psychological theory, reasserting the therapeutic distance I was trained to maintain. "Ethical codes, Martha," I'd remind myself, "professional boundaries are non-negotiable." Yet, even as I consciously reaffirmed my role, I found myself increasingly drawn to her quiet intensity. I observed the subtle shifts in her expression, the way her lips would curve almost imperceptibly when she stumbled upon a particularly insightful thought, the slight narrowing of her eyes when she was deeply considering a point. There was a delicate flicker of light in her hazel eyes when she spoke of her passions, an almost imperceptible softening around her mouth that spoke of a hidden vulnerability. The atmosphere whenever Valerie was in the room was peculiar. It wasn't tense, nor overtly emotional, but rather charged with a subtle, almost electric quality. It was as if every word, every silence, held a double meaning, an unspoken layer that hummed beneath the surface. I found myself anticipating her sessions in a way I hadn't with other patients, a tiny, unfamiliar spark of curiosity beneath my professional composure. One afternoon, Valerie was discussing her difficulty in forming lasting connections, her tendency to observe rather than fully engage. "It's like I'm always on the outside looking in," she said, her gaze steady. "I understand people, I feel their emotions, but there's a barrier." She then paused, her eyes searching mine. "Do you ever feel that, Dr. Reed? That sometimes understanding too much can create a distance?" My breath hitched almost imperceptibly. It was a question that brushed uncomfortably close to my own deeply ingrained professional detachment, a principle that had, perhaps, bled into my personal life more than I cared to admit. I cleared my throat, adjusting my posture. "In our profession, Valerie, maintaining a degree of objective distance is crucial for effective guidance. It allows us to process information without our own biases clouding our judgment." My voice was calm, measured, perfectly professional. But inside, a small, insistent voice whispered, "Is that all it is, Martha? Or is it a shield?" Valerie simply nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, as if she had heard not just my words, but the unarticulated thought beneath them. She didn't challenge my response, didn't push for more. She simply watched me, her gaze lingering, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us that made my usually cool demeanor feel a little less impenetrable. It was a subtle challenge, delivered without a single aggressive word, yet it resonated deeply within me. I acknowledged a peculiar, almost electric atmosphere whenever Valerie was in the room, a silent current flowing between us that defied easy categorization. It made me aware of my own breathing, the slight shift of fabric against my skin, the unexpected vulnerability of simply being seen. And though I would never admit it, not even to myself, I found I didn't entirely mind. Life outside my office, once a meticulously crafted counterpoint to the emotional complexities within, began to show faint, almost imperceptible cracks. David and I had always maintained a certain independent rhythm, a comfortable understanding that our demanding careers often pulled us in different directions. But lately, the silence between us had deepened, becoming less comfortable and more empty. It began subtly. A late night for David, attributed to a demanding client presentation, stretched into the early hours with a casual explanation that felt a touch too rehearsed. Then there was the forgotten anniversary. Not entirely forgotten, he'd insisted, just lost in the whirlwind of a particularly grueling week. He bought me flowers the next day, a beautiful arrangement of white lilies, but the gesture felt more like an obligation than an act of love. The lilies, with their pristine petals and delicate scent, felt ironically fragile, almost symbolic of something teetering on the edge. I dismissed these instances at first, blamed them on stress, on the relentless pace of modern life, on the inevitable ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. David was under immense pressure at work, and I, too, had my hands full, not least with the peculiar intensity Valerie brought to my office. My mind, usually so adept at compartmentalizing, found itself revisiting these small, unsettling details during quiet moments, like faint echoes in an otherwise silent room. I would catch David gazing out the window during dinner, his expression distant, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. When I asked him what he was thinking, he'd offer a vague, "Just work, darling. Big project on my mind." And I would accept it because that was what we did. We accepted. We moved on. But the seeds of doubt, once sown, began to sprout. A quiet, persistent anxiety, like a dull ache, started to fray the edges of my typically calm demeanor. My focus, usually razor-sharp, would occasionally waver. During a therapy session with a different patient, I found myself momentarily losing the thread of their narrative, my thoughts drifting to an unanswered text from David or the faint, unfamiliar perfume I'd caught on his jacket earlier that week. I would quickly recenter myself, my professional training kicking in, but the effort felt more arduous than before. My hands, usually so steady, would sometimes shake slightly as I poured my morning coffee. I would catch my reflection in the mirror, noticing a slight strain around my eyes that hadn't been there before, a shadow of weariness that no amount of sleep seemed to banish. I was Martha, the psychologist, the calm and collected professional, but beneath the surface, a quiet storm was gathering. I rationalized it all, of course. My work was emotionally draining. David's architectural projects were always consuming. It was normal for relationships to have periods of quiet. This was just a phase, a temporary dip in the otherwise smooth trajectory of our lives. Yet, the unease persisted, a low thrumming beneath the surface of my consciousness. It was a feeling I knew well from observing my patients, a quiet premonition of change. I was experiencing it now, not as an objective observer, but as the one standing on the precipice. The pristine lilies on my dining table seemed to droop a little more each day, their once vibrant white beginning to yellow at the edges. The cracks, though hairline thin, were there. And I, Martha, the expert in human psychology, was too busy constructing a narrative of normalcy to truly acknowledge them. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy shattered one Tuesday morning. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no tearful accusations. It was far more insidious, far more devastating in its quiet finality. I had returned home from an early patient, a session that had left me feeling particularly drained, my anxieties about David already a dull ache beneath my ribs. The house was quiet, an unnerving silence that amplified the frantic beat of my own heart. David had left for work, or so I thought. He'd mentioned an early meeting. I was tidying up the bedroom, a mindless chore I often used to quiet my restless mind, when I noticed his phone on the nightstand. He was meticulous about keeping it with him. A strange, cold dread settled in my stomach. It was an involuntary reaction, a primal instinct that screamed danger. My fingers, strangely numb, picked it up. My ethical code, my professional integrity, shrieked against the action. But the ache in my chest, the persistent whisper of doubt that had tormented me for weeks, silenced all reason. I knew his password. It was our anniversary date. A bitter irony. My thumb hovered over his messages. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I told myself it was wrong, a violation of trust, a descent into paranoia. But the image of the wilting lilies, the distant gaze, the unexplained late nights, flashed through my mind like a chaotic montage. With a deep, shuddering breath, I opened the messaging app. The first few messages were innocuous, work-related. Then, a thread with an unfamiliar name, Sasha. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I scrolled. The messages were undeniable. Casual at first, then increasingly intimate, filled with shared jokes, stolen moments, future plans. Words of endearment that had once been reserved for me. Photos, too, discreet but undeniably intimate, a shared meal, a hand playfully resting on a shoulder, a knowing smile. The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a sudden, violent whoosh. I felt a visceral shock, a profound betrayal that went deeper than words could describe. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the shattering of a carefully curated reality. My marriage, the stable foundation of my life, was a lie. The respect, the understanding, the shared ambitions, they were all hollow echoes. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from my grasp to land with a soft thud on the rug. My mind, usually so analytical, so capable of processing complex emotions, was a blank. Shock, disbelief, a deep, aching pain washed over me in overwhelming waves. It was as if a part of me, a core belief about my life and who I was, had been violently ripped away. The meticulously ordered world of Martha, the psychologist, was not just cracked, it was utterly, irreparably shattered. The silence of the house pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt constricted, a tight band of agony. My vision blurred, not with tears immediately, but with a kind of internal static, a white noise of pain. My hands shook uncontrollably. The tears came later, hot and stinging, a torrent of grief for a love lost, for a future stolen, for the profound indignity of being so thoroughly deceived. I, the psychologist, the expert in human emotions, felt utterly adrift, a vessel without a rudder in a suddenly turbulent sea. The irony was a cruel, sharp twist in my gut. I was supposed to be the one who helped others navigate their emotional landscapes, and now I found myself lost, without a map, without a compass, in a wasteland of betrayal and grief. The world around me faded, leaving only the raw, visceral pain of an unseen wound. The days that followed were a blur of internal torment, cloaked in a fragile veneer of functionality. The discovery of David's infidelity had been a devastating blow, leaving me feeling hollowed out, as if an essential part of my being had been scooped away. My professional facade, once so impenetrable, was now a precarious shell, threatening to crumble with the slightest tremor. I forced myself through my routine, arriving at the office, seeing patients, offering the practiced empathy and guidance that was my craft. But it was an act, a grueling performance that left me utterly exhausted. My mind, once a clear, analytical instrument, was now a chaotic echo chamber, replaying snippets of messages, flashes of images, the sickening realization of a trust utterly broken. My ability to empathize or even concentrate during sessions was severely compromised. I often found myself staring blankly, my responses automatic, hollow. I was a puppet, going through the motions. My patients, thankfully, seemed mostly oblivious. They were absorbed in their own narratives, their own pains. But Valerie was different. Her acute perceptiveness, which had always been a subtle challenge, now became a quiet, unwavering mirror. From the moment she walked into my office for her next session, I could feel her eyes on me, not just seeing but observing. She didn't ask directly, but her gaze, usually intense, had softened, becoming almost solicitous. She noticed the slight shake in my hands as I poured myself water, the faint redness around my eyes I'd tried to conceal with makeup, the way I occasionally lost my train of thought, staring into the middle distance. "You seem preoccupied today, Dr. Reed," she remarked gently, her voice a quiet balm in the storm of my mind. It wasn't a question, more an observation, phrased not as a patient's concern for her therapist, but as one sensitive human acknowledging another's distress. Her questions subtly pivoted from her own issues, which she usually articulated with such clarity, to more general observations about the stresses of my profession. "It must be incredibly demanding, carrying the burdens of so many people," she mused, her head tilted slightly, her hazel eyes fixed on me. "Do you ever find it overwhelming?" I offered clumsy, professional excuses, my voice feeling strangely detached from my body. "It's a demanding field, Valerie, but I find it rewarding. Just a particularly busy week." My words felt hollow, a flimsy shield against her gentle but persistent probing. I could feel the light chafing against my skin, hear the falseness in my own voice. Valerie simply nodded, her expression unreadable, yet filled with a profound understanding. She didn't press, didn't argue. She just listened, her presence a steady, quiet anchor. The usual 45 minutes of our session felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Then, during a particularly quiet moment, as I tried to guide her back to a topic about her own emotional detachment, my facade crumbled. My throat tightened. The words wouldn't form. I looked at her, at those deep, knowing eyes, and felt an overwhelming wave of grief wash over me. The pain, which I had so desperately tried to keep locked away, burst forth. I can't," I choked out, my voice thick with unshed tears. The professional distance, the ethical boundaries, the carefully constructed walls, all dissolved in that instant. "My husband, he's been unfaithful." The words were whispered, raw and agonizing. My vision blurred. A hot wave of shame and sorrow washed over me. I felt the tears stream down my face, hot and stinging, utterly exposed. To break down in front of a patient, to betray every principle of my profession, was an unforgivable sin. But the dam had broken. The pain was too immense, too overwhelming. Valerie didn't say a word. She simply rose from her armchair, moved to my side, and handed me a box of tissues, her presence quiet and unwavering. She didn't reach out, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just stood there, a solid, grounding force as I let the tears flow. I felt myself slump forward slightly, the last vestiges of my control dissolving, but I remained seated, my hands clutching the tissues tightly. I cried, not as Martha the psychologist, but as Martha, a woman utterly broken. In that moment, with Valerie's silent support beside me, I found an unforeseen solace, a quiet strength in her steady presence. I, the psychologist, was being held in a different way, not by touch but by understanding, and it was exactly what I needed. The memory of my breakdown, of Valerie's quiet support beside me, was still raw, a tender wound in my consciousness. I had never imagined such a profound reversal of roles. Martha Reed, the psychologist, the unwavering professional, had shattered in front of my patient. Yet, the shame I anticipated felt muted, overshadowed by a strange, overwhelming sense of relief. It was as if a crushing weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. The session, of course, had ended abruptly. I had mumbled an apology, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of control, but Valerie had simply nodded, her hazel eyes holding a depth of understanding that transcended words. She had simply said, "Sometimes, Dr. Reed, even the healers need a moment to be human." Her voice was soft, compassionate, utterly devoid of judgment. She had quietly packed her bag and left, leaving me alone in my office, which now felt different, imbued with the echo of shared vulnerability. The next few days were a blur. I canceled appointments, citing a sudden illness, needing time to process the seismic shift in my personal landscape. My carefully constructed world lay in ruins, and I felt utterly lost. It was then that Valerie initiated a different kind of healing. She didn't call as a patient, but as a friend. Her first text message was simple, almost understated. "Thinking of you, Martha." No pressure to reply, just a quiet thought. It was an offering of space, of understanding, without expectation. Soon, her quiet presence began to fill the void. She would suggest walks in a secluded park near my apartment, where the rustling leaves and distant chirping of birds created a natural, soothing balm. We wouldn't talk about therapy or even directly about David, unless I initiated it. Instead, she would ask questions that encouraged me to process my pain, to acknowledge my vulnerability, mirroring, in a strangely ironic way, my own therapeutic techniques, but applied to me. "What do you need right now, Martha?" she asked one afternoon, as we sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Her voice was gentle, her gaze steady. "Not what you think you should feel, or what you should do, but what your heart truly yearns for." I was speechless. No one had ever asked me that, not truly. My entire life had been about fulfilling expectations, about managing what was expected. Her question was a quiet invitation to look inward, to listen to the fractured pieces of myself. Valerie became a quiet pillar of support. She would bring over simple, comforting meals, silently setting them out in my kitchen while I sat numbly on the sofa. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic pronouncements. Just unwavering companionship. Long periods of comfortable silence would stretch between us, punctuated by her insightful observations about the world, or a gentle comment that subtly nudged me towards introspection. One evening, as I recounted a particularly painful memory of David, tears welled in my eyes again. Valerie simply offered me a warm mug of tea, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's all right to feel it, Martha," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "The pain is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged." I realized, with a profound sense of wonder and irony, that I, the psychologist, was being healed by my patient. Valerie wasn't analyzing me, she was simply seeing me, offering a quiet, steady presence that allowed me to feel, to grieve, to slowly, tentatively, begin to piece myself back together. She provided the emotional fortitude I didn't know I lacked. This unique, unconventional bond formed between us, built on the crucible of shared vulnerability and a deep, unspoken understanding. It was a connection born from the ashes of my old life, a testament to the unexpected paths healing could take. Her quiet strength was like a steady flame, warming the cold, desolate landscape of my shattered heart. I was no longer Martha, the perfectly composed professional. I was Martha, the wounded woman, and in Valerie's quiet presence, I was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to find my way back to myself. Valerie's quiet presence became the new anchor in my life. The initial shock and raw grief had begun to recede, leaving behind a profound emptiness, but also a tiny flicker of resolve. It was a resolve fueled by Valerie's unwavering belief in my strength, a belief she communicated not through grand statements, but through subtle suggestions and steadfast support. We continued our walks, our conversations evolving from my immediate pain to tentative explorations of my future. She never told me what to do, never offered direct advice. Instead, she asked open-ended questions that gently pushed me to define my own path. When you imagine a future, Martha, one entirely on your own terms, what does it look like? She asked one blustery autumn afternoon as we watched leaves spiral down from the trees. What does freedom feel like to you? Her questions were like gentle breezes, stirring dormant thoughts, encouraging me to visualize a life beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal, a life not defined by what I had lost, but by what I could build anew. She helped me see beyond the wreckage, to envision a landscape where I could plant new seeds. I found myself confiding in her more deeply than I had ever confided in anyone, even David. I spoke of my fears, my insecurities, the deep-seated professional identity that had shaped my entire adult life. Valerie listened, always. Her hazel eyes, once subtly challenging, now held a warmth that was deeply reassuring. She validated my feelings, acknowledged my struggles, and provided a quiet, empathetic space for me to confront the difficult decisions ahead. You are a woman of remarkable strength, Martha, she remarked one evening as we sat in my living room, nursing mugs of herbal tea. The soft glow of a lamp cast long shadows across the room. And you deserve a life that honors that strength, that reflects your true self. Her voice was soft, but the conviction behind her words was absolute. It was the emotional fortitude I needed, a profound sense of being seen and understood for who I truly was, not just for the role I played. It was in those quiet moments, surrounded by Valerie's steadfast belief, that the fragmented pieces of my courage began to coalesce. The idea of divorce, once a terrifying chasm, slowly transformed into a necessary step, a reclaiming of my agency. My marriage, I realized, had become a gilded cage, and the key had always been in my hand. The decision was not easy. It involved difficult conversations with David, conversations laced with his disbelief, his attempts to minimize, to rationalize. But I faced them with a newfound clarity, a quiet resolve forged in the crucible of my recent pain, and Valerie's unwavering support. I spoke with a lawyer, began the necessary paperwork, each step a definitive movement towards a new life. This was a significant turning point. It wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about reclaiming myself. Valerie was there through it all, not as a silent observer from a distance, but as an active, nurturing presence. She didn't interfere, didn't offer advice on legal specifics, but she was always there, a steady hand in the form of a listening ear, a calming voice, a silent cheerleading squad for my hesitant steps forward. Her presence was a silent affirmation of my inherent worth, a quiet reminder that I was capable of navigating this difficult path. Empowered by her unwavering support and my own rekindled inner strength, I made the difficult decision to pursue a divorce. It was a profound act of self-preservation, a definitive step towards a future I would define, free from the shadows of betrayal. And in taking that step, I felt a quiet sense of liberation, a deep breath of fresh air after years of holding my breath. My carefully curated life had shattered, but from its wreckage, something new, something resilient, was beginning to emerge, guided by the quiet strength of an unexpected ally. As the divorce proceedings slowly wound their way through legal channels, the formal therapeutic relationship between Valerie and me naturally dissolved. It was an unspoken understanding, a quiet evolution rather than an abrupt ending. Our conversations had long since moved beyond the structured boundaries of therapy, venturing into the open landscape of genuine connection. My healing journey had become intertwined with our burgeoning bond, transforming into a profound friendship, one built on the crucible of shared vulnerability and a deep, empathetic understanding. Valerie no longer sat in the client armchair. She sat beside me on the sofa, or across from me at my kitchen table, sharing a meal. The peculiar electric hum that had once defined our sessions was still present, but it had softened, mellowed into a comfortable, almost vital energy that now defined our shared spaces. I found myself increasingly reliant on Valerie's presence. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet solitude, now felt empty when she wasn't there. Her insights, once delivered with a careful detachment of a patient reflecting on her own life, now flowed naturally into our conversations, offering clarity and perspective on my own evolving situation. We would spend hours talking, not about deep psychological concepts, but about everyday things, about books, art, the subtle shifts in the seasons, the quiet observations of human nature that had always fascinated us both. There was an undeniable, almost palpable emotional intimacy that bloomed between us. It transcended conventional friendship, hinting at something more profound, something uniquely powerful. We understood each other in a way no one else ever had. She saw the Martha beneath the composed professional, the woman who loved the scent of old books and found solace in quiet contemplation. I saw the Valerie beneath the quiet exterior, the fiercely intelligent, deeply empathetic soul who carried her own quiet strengths and vulnerabilities. Our evenings often stretched late, punctuated by the soft glow of lamplight and the comfortable clinking of teacups. There was an ease between us that felt rare, a sense that we didn't need to fill every silence with words. Our presence alone was enough. It was an unconventional connection, born from such an unusual confluence of events. I was her therapist, then her patient in a way, then her friend, and now something else entirely. It was a space defined by unspoken words, by shared silences, by the gentle, steady beat of two hearts finding an unexpected rhythm together. The emotional landscape of my life, once so rigidly defined by predictability and expectation, had been irrevocably altered. What began as a professional obligation had transformed into something deeply personal, something that resonated with a truth I hadn't realized I was missing. With Valerie, I felt a sense of belonging, a profound peace that settled deep within my bones. Our unique circumstances had forged a bond that defied easy categorization, hinting at an unusual, powerful attraction. The air around us, always subtly charged, now felt thick with unspoken possibilities, with a quiet promise of a love that was just beginning to unfurl its petals. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of unspoken feelings, a profound exploration of the emotional landscape that had opened between Valerie and me. My divorce was finalized, a quiet chapter closing, leaving me with a sense of quiet relief and a vast, open space in my life that Valerie seemed to effortlessly fill. The boundaries that once defined my existence, professional, marital, personal, had blurred, then reshaped, revealing a freedom I hadn't known I craved. My internal monologue, once dominated by analytical thoughts and professional ethics, now revolved around Valerie. Her quiet strength, her profound understanding, her mere presence, brought me a sense of peace and belonging I had never before experienced. I found myself anticipating our shared moments with a gentle eagerness, a quiet hum beneath my skin. When she was near, the world felt clearer, brighter, as if a filter had been lifted from my perception. Valerie, with her characteristic quiet attentiveness, seemed to mirror my own unspoken sentiments. Her insightful comments, always piercing to the heart of the matter, now seemed aimed directly at my own evolving spirit. Her steady support wasn't just a comfort, it was a foundational element of my new reality. We were no longer navigating my pain, we were simply being, together, in a shared space of quiet intimacy. One crisp autumn evening, after a particularly long and candid conversation about the future, we found ourselves in her living room. The scent of rain-soaked earth drifted in through the open window, mixing with the subtle aroma of the herbal tea we had been drinking. The only light came from a single, soft lamp, casting a warm glow that softened the edges of the room. Valerie had been recounting a story from her childhood, a tender memory about her grandmother, and her voice, usually so steady, held a rare, poignant vulnerability. As she finished, a comfortable silence settled between us, rich with unspoken emotions. I looked at her, truly looked at her. The soft light illuminated the delicate planes of her face, the gentle curve of her lips, the mesmerizing depth of her hazel eyes. In that moment, all the complexities of our journey, The therapist and patient, the healer and the healed, the friends and confidants, converged into a single, undeniable truth. I was profoundly, irrevocably drawn to her. Our eyes met across the small space separating us. Her gaze was soft, unwavering, a mirror reflecting my own burgeoning affection. There was no need for words. Every emotion, every tender feeling was laid bare between us in that quiet, luminous connection. The air thickened, charged with a magnetic pull, an invisible thread weaving us closer. Without conscious thought, drawn by an irresistible force, I leaned in. Valerie did the same, her eyes never leaving mine. It was a slow, deliberate movement, an acknowledgement of everything unsaid, everything felt. Our lips met, softly, gently, brief, tender, a quiet affirmation of the bond we'd built. There was no urgency, no fanfare, just a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. It was a gentle sealing of our bond, an exquisite unfolding of affection that had been quietly nurtured through shared vulnerability and unwavering support. In that quiet moment, the world outside faded away. There was only Valerie and me and the profound, undeniable truth of our unconventional love, finally acknowledged. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a gentle beginning to the next chapter of our lives. The quiet, affirming kiss in Valerie's living room was not an explosion, but a soft settling, like dust after storm. It was the confirmation of a truth that had been steadily building between us, a profound sense of rightness that permeated every corner of my being. My world, once so rigidly defined by predictability and societal expectations, had not just expanded, it had blossomed into something vibrant and unexpected. Valerie and I embraced our unconventional relationship with a quiet conviction. There were no grand declarations, no public pronouncements. Our love was ours, a private sanctuary built on the foundations of mutual respect, deep understanding, and shared vulnerability. We found strength and solace in each other's presence, navigating the quiet complexities of our bond with a natural grace. My journey had transformed me in ways I never could have foreseen. The Martha who once prided herself on impenetrable professional detachment now found a richer, more authentic sense of self in openness and emotional connection. I was more attuned to my own emotional landscape, more willing to feel deeply, to connect truly. The experience of being healed by my own patient, of having my carefully constructed walls dismantled by Valerie's quiet perceptiveness, had reshaped my understanding of human connection and of myself. Valerie, too, had found a deeper connection and purpose in our bond. Her quiet observation, once a subtle barrier to engagement, now served as a profound conduit for empathy and understanding between us. We spoke for hours, sometimes about the mundane details of our days, sometimes about the grand philosophies of life, always with a deep, unspoken current of affection flowing between us. Her presence alone was a comfort, a silent affirmation of our shared journey. There was a profound peace that settled over me. The pain of David's betrayal had receded, leaving behind not bitterness, but a quiet understanding of resilience. My life, once defined by what I thought it should be, was now defined by what it was: rich, complex, and filled with an unexpected, deeply fulfilling love. We often talked about the future, not with rigid plans, but with an open-ended sense of possibility. Our story was not one of definitive endings, but of continuous growth, an unfolding narrative. One sunny afternoon, as we sat in my favorite cafe, the aroma of roasted coffee beans filling the air, Valerie looked at me, her hazel eyes twinkling. "You know, Martha," she said softly, "sometimes the most beautiful paths are the ones we never expected to walk." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached my eyes. "And sometimes," I replied, my voice imbued with a quiet certainty, "the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected of places and people." Our story concludes with an open horizon, a vast expanse of possibilities stretching before us. Our enduring, profound connection had healed old wounds, forged new paths, and brought us both to a place of deeper understanding and authentic selfhood. We would continue to navigate this life together, on our own terms, two souls intertwined in a love that defied convention, a testament to the quiet strength found in vulnerability and the transformative power of an unexpected connection. The world was wide, and our journey, a testament to resilience and the surprising nature of the heart, had only just begun.